Okay, I'd like to welcome you all to the third annual Lake Mills Astilin Historical Society Cemetery Walk. And I'm always amazed at the people that are buried here. And some of them are really quite famous, surprisingly. And you'll find that out as you go through the tour today. Anyway, my name is Elbert Ernst Crocked. I was born May 8th, 1889 in the town of Astilin to August and Augusta Crocked. My only sibling was my sister Annie, born in Germany in 1884. So somewhere in that 5-year time period, my family emigrated to the United States from Germany and settled here. In 1915, I married Anna Bowman of Watertown, of which we had 4 children. We built a new house on the banks of the Crawfish River in 1925. And believe it or not, that house is still there. I was a farmer. In 1948, I sold my farm to the state of Wisconsin, of which my land became part of Astilin State Park, which opened in 1952. I worked hard being part of the group of individuals traveling to Madison numerous times, lobbying state legislators to save this the foremost archaeological site in the state. After the site was acquired by the state, I was employed by the state DNR as its caretaker well into my 70s. I basically mowed the lawn. And today they don't mow the lawn at all. This Native American heritage site is in my blood. I housed in my house Dr. Samuel Barrett from the Milwaukee Museum as he and his researchers conducted numerous digs on the site in 1919, 1921, and 1932. When I worked my fields as a farmer, I remember finding 19 arrowheads in one day, slowly plowing the earth with horses, watching the soil being overturned, exposing those small stones that the winter's frost had driven up to the surface. I so enjoyed walking the fields with my grandson in the spring, looking for arrowheads along the banks of the Crawfish River. My collection of artifacts became quite extensive and is currently on display in the Astilin Museum. And there's a picture of me right here with some of those artifacts taken inside the museum. I am a charter member of the Lake Mills Astilin Historical Society, which was formed in 1941, where I served as treasurer for 8 years and as president for 17 years. We opened the Astilin Museum on May 30th, 1942, which I would assume was Memorial Day. And in 1967, the first Astilin Day was held and has been celebrated every July for the next 51 years. I was named President Emeritus of the Society and was curator of the museum until 1968. I served on the Astilin School Board for 37 years. When there was only a one-room schoolhouse. I understand that 101-year-old schoolhouse is now part of the Astilin Museum complex. I was a 4-H leader, treasurer of the Astilin Cemetery Association, and was quite active in my church, serving as treasurer, trustee, and elder of the Lake Mills Moravian Church. In my retirement years, I enjoyed speaking to school groups, sharing the story of the Mississippians that occupied the state site and historic pioneer Astilin and explaining what life was like in the mid-1800s. In 1968, I was honored by the State Historical Society of Wisconsin by receiving the Local History Award of Merit. The citation on the award reads, and I quote, "For a lifetime of leadership devoted to the history and prehistory of Astilin, this is awarded to Elbert Crocked. To the many adults outside the Historical Society to whose meetings Elbert Crocked has spoken, and to the hundreds of youngsters who have met him on field trips to Astilin. It is difficult to separate the man from the history of Astilin, the Indian site, and the museum in which their story is told." End quote. I so enjoyed telling the Astilin story to school groups. I feel I had the demeanor and the calm, unhurried voice that connected with young people. I've been told I am quiet, soft-spoken, friendly, genuine, dependable, and very patient. My daughter Mildred once stated that she never remembers me ever raising my voice. I passed away on July 21st, 1974, at the age of 85. I consider myself so fortunate to have been able to live in my house on the Crawfish River all the way to the end. Thank you. And he was my grandpa.
Hello, everyone. I hope you've enjoyed meeting some of the people of Lake Mills of the past. I am also one from Lake Mills, and I am wearing for you a hood that is the kind of thing that might have been sold at my daughter's shop. They had a shop right on the square, and it was in the old English's Meat Market building. My husband was John Winnick, and he was a lawyer in Lake Mills, and he bought that building to establish his law practice, and we also lived there. My name is Lucretia Clark Winnick, and I lived in Lake Mills from 1864 to 1888. I was the second oldest of 10 children, born and raised in Greenfield and Cold Spring, Wisconsin. Cold Spring is southeast of Fort Atkinson. I was John Winnick's second wife. His first wife is buried here, Mary Winnick. She bore him 10 children and died in 1863. I married John on the 24th of September, 1864, less than a year after she died. I knew what I was in for. He had lots of these children still at home with him, and he needed help. John had an active law practice, starting first in Whitewater, and then he moved here to Lake Mills. As I said, Mary is buried here, and her son Fred is buried back here, his wife Ellen, and then here's a grave that says Mother. That might be me. I hope so, but I'm not sure. The children were quite distraught when they lost their beloved mother and got a new mother in such a short time. But I did the best I could for them. I loved her children as well as my children equally. John and I had 6 children of our own, and you can see their pictures here. Minerva, Clara, Hattie, Dora, Agnes, Orrin, and Frank. My children are on the right side here, and the children from his first marriage are in the left picture. You can see a picture of him in the upper left and a picture of Mary. She was a beautiful woman. My 6 children were raised in Lake Mills and went through the Lake Mills School District. Let's see. I tried to give all the children their best start in life, regardless of which mother brought them into this world. My husband was an attorney, a surveyor, and a civil engineer, and he was a very generous man. When we married, he gave me 10 acres of land just west of here. During our 34-year marriage, I acquired additional land. By the time I died in 1888, I owned 1,000 acres of land, which was a lot for anyone to own and a lot for a woman to own. I was very fortunate. In early 1888, John traveled to Colorado and California to visit some of his older children, some of which had grandchildren for him. While he was gone, I became gravely ill and I did not recover. I died in his absence of paralysis on July 2nd, 1888. John came back to settle things up and sell off everything, and then he went back to California, where he died 2 years later in Loomis, California. I am buried here somewhere in Rock Lake Cemetery, but we could not quite locate where my grave is. As I said, I'm thinking maybe here that looks old enough, and if I'm remembered for anything, I would love to be remembered as a good mother. I thank you for visiting us today, and I hope you've had an enjoyable time meeting some of the people from Lake Mills past.
Hello, my name is George Bowman Ferry. I was born in 1851 in Springfield, Massachusetts, to Robert Spencer and Elzira Ferry. So the first thing you're probably asking is, How did a Yankee like me end up in Lake Mills, Wisconsin? Well, let me see. Do you have a couple minutes?
Yes.
Okay. I was a gifted student, and I attended the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, maybe better known as MIT, and I gained my degree in architectural engineering. Right after I graduated, I started my own firm called Ferry and Gardner, right there in Springfield. But that didn't last too long. I moved to Milwaukee in 1881. So now you're probably wondering, why did I move from Springfield to Milwaukee? Well, there is a story behind that. I met Cora Phillips. She was from right here in Lake Mills, Wisconsin. Well, Cora has an interesting history about herself as well. She was the great-granddaughter of Hezekiah Joslin. He was a private in the Berkshire County, Massachusetts militia and fought in the Revolutionary War. But that's a whole nother story. But in case you're interested in cemetery walks, and I'm making that bold assumption that you are, otherwise you would not be here, is that we may have a presentation next year about Cora Phillips, so stay tuned. But I get off topic. Anyway, Cora and I were married in 1880, and there was a strong desire to move to Wisconsin, so we did in 1881, and I joined the architectural firm of Henry C. Cook. Well, I didn't stay there all that long. I decided to set out on my own, but I stayed in Milwaukee. I was gaining a reputation as a leading architect in the Victorian Gothic style, which was quite popular during the Victorian era. And along with my reputation, I was becoming more successful. And in 1890, I decided to merge my firm with Elbert C. Claus to form Ferry and Claus Architecture Firm, also located in Milwaukee. And boy, after that, my career just took off. I built a number of buildings in the state of Wisconsin, mostly churches, schools, courthouses, libraries, other types of public buildings. Built them mostly in Milwaukee and Madison. And I'm thinking you might be familiar with some of the works that I've done. First one that comes to mind is the Pabst Mansion in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. Have any of you ever been there? It's not a house, is it? It is a mansion. Well, Captain Frederick Pabst, yes, of the Pabst PBR fame, still America's greatest beer. Anyway, he contracted with our firm to build his mansion at a cost of $75,000. Well, we set out right out in building that, and it took us 2 years to get it completed at a cost of $254,000. That would be $6.1 million in today's terms. And for those of you keeping the math straight, yeah, there was a 3 times cost overrun. But you know, Mr. Pabst, he didn't seem to care too much because he sure liked that mansion. And you know, I have a saying too, it must be nice to be wealthy. Anyway, another building you might be familiar with is located in Madison, Wisconsin. Wisconsin State Historical Society building, located on State Street Mall. Turns out around the turn of the century, the society was running short on space for its collections and also wanted to expand some of its research. So they contracted with our firm to build the building, and after 3 years, it was dedicated in 1902. Another maybe less known building that you might be familiar with in Madison is the Brittingham Park Boathouse, which is located on Monona Bay. I was also involved in that. But the structure you might be most familiar with is located right here in Lake Mills, Wisconsin. Now, I'm not talking about Ferry Drive, even though that is named after my family. I'm talking about the L.D. Fargo Library, located not too far over there. In 1899, the L.D. Fargo family gifted $6,000 towards building a public library for the city of Lake Mills. And they worked with the Library Commission and they accepted our architectural plans. Well, we set right off to work in 1899, and one of the first things we did is we contacted with farmers that had horses and wagons, because we had a lot of stones to haul to build that library. And a lot of those stones come from L.D. Fargo's farm just west of here. Well, we didn't call them stones, we called them hardheads. And there's a good example of one right over there. If you can imagine hauling those types of stones or hardheads for construction of a library, it was hard work. But thank God for those volunteers. And you know what? After 3 years, the library was complete, and it was dedicated in 1902. Now, if you take a look at that library or that building, you would swear it's a church. And that's not by mistake either. You remember that Victorian Gothic style architecture I was telling you about? Well, this was Victorian Neo-Gothic Revival architectural style. And it was very popular style in building churches at that time. Well, anyway, building's dedicated in 1902, and I understand it's still in use today. It stands as a strong testament to the values of the people of Lake Mills for education and free thinking. I continued my work until 1913, which time we dissolved our firm, and after that I just worked part-time until my death in 1918. I look back at my career with pride and satisfaction for the buildings I was able to build throughout the state of Wisconsin. But one thing I am most proud of is receiving the Design Architectural Excellence Award at the Paris World's Fair in recognition of all the buildings I had built throughout the state of Wisconsin. Well, my legacy lives on. My great-grandson, William P. Ferry, also of Lake Mills, back in 2001 took my papers and he donated them to the Pabst Mansion Museum. So if you want to learn more about me, just take a short ride down the road, attend the mansion, and have a PBR. Anyway, I must be running. I want to thank you for all listening to my story. Have a great day. Thank you.
Excuse me, Pa. We have visitors. Good afternoon. My name is Clara Pippin Carpenter. I'm not from here, just visiting family. My dear George's father, George Sr., I'm just catching him up on the latest news. I met and married my George Carpenter Jr. in 1900 after George Sr. passed. My husband was the son of George and Mary Carpenter, who came from the South. George Sr. and his family settled in Lake Mills after he served in Company F of the 53rd Regiment in the U.S. Colored Troops in the Civil War. Yes, that's right. I said he served in the U.S. Colored Troops of the Civil War. You see, George Sr., my father-in-law, was a former black slave. After serving in the U.S. Civil War, he brought his wife Mary to Wisconsin, where all of his children were born. Ella, Savannah Bell, John, and George Jr., my husband. George Sr. started as a farm laborer in Lake Mills, but later became a landowner. Very unusual during his time. He was truly free. But in 1884, he sold his home and farm to his longtime neighbor August Lang and moved the family to Baraboo, where Sr. became a minister. My sister-in-law Savannah, who went by Belle, married a black man in Baraboo named Totten Christopher. They had 3 children before Sr. passed away in November of 1888. When George Sr. passed away, his remains were returned to Lake Mills, the first place he settled as a freed slave. George Jr. and I, well, we eloped. As you can see, I am white. And in 1900, we caused quite a stir. Oh, my parents were angry. They even called the police to stop us. But the police told them there was nothing they could do. I was an adult, and our marriage, although interracial, was not illegal at the time. There were articles in papers all over the state about our elopement, like this one here. The Watertown Republican, Eau Claire Leader, Monroe Weekly Times, and the Oshkosh Daily Northwestern all ran the story of our elopement and made it sound like we did a terrible thing. Can you imagine? My George and I just loved each other, and all we wanted was to be married. There were several black families that settled in the area between the end of the Civil War and 1900, the highest in Jefferson County. Many of the former slaves, whether freed, escaped, or contraband from the war, headed north to start new lives. However, after a few accidental deaths of black men who lived here, many of the black families left the area. George Newton of Astlin had a tree fall on him. He too was married to a younger white woman. And young Richard Lawrence Jr. was found by the Koshkonong Creek, mangled badly. That was ruled a train accident. Both deaths were reviewed and declared accidents very quickly by all white juries. However, suspicions of beatings and lynchings weighed heavy on the minds of other black families and the community. Did you know that in Lake Mills between 1870 and 1890, there were huge Emancipation Day celebrations which drew people in from all over the state? The large number of white attendees was a testament to the strength of Lake Mills' racial integration at the time. The celebrations held in Commons Park downtown were never closed to the whites. It was always an open, public event. But with the change in the community's mood, the celebrations ended, replaced by a more general community celebration, and by 1930, there were no blacks residing in Lake Mills. An attitude of, that's just the way things were, slowly caused people to forget the former black families that lived here. There were never laws enacted barring blacks from being hired here, but very quickly the blacks moved away from the area when they were passed up for jobs. Lake Mills was never a sundown town which aggressively limits or prohibited black people from sometimes publicly stating so by big signs at the edge of their community limits, but nonetheless, families moved away and stayed away until the 1950s. I'd like to get back to reading the latest article about my elopement to George. Such slander. Tisk, tisk. Good day.
I'm Ralph Seward. This is a picture of me and my wife, born in 1878. I grew up on a farm 3 miles north of Astlin, not exactly the center of the universe. In my early years, the going was rough for me as a kid. When I was 8, my sister 5, our mom died in childbirth. Years later, when I married Lorena, my wife, this is something we shared. Her mom died, leaving her with a stepmother and a bunch of difficulties just like mine. Jasper, my dad, he was a good man and good with kids, but sort of an impractical farmer. He always struggled for money and things didn't work out. But in the debating class in Lake Mills High School, they said that I was bold, decided, concise, and true to the line of the argument. Well, I wanted to be a lawyer more than anything in the world. Aunt Hattie was very anxious that I should go to the university in Madison and become a lawyer. She offered to pay half if Pa'd paid the other half. Pa said he needed me on the farm and he wasn't interested. I graduated from Lake Mills High School. Here's the graduation ceremony. 13 of us. As you could guess, most people didn't graduate from high school. My first job, I walked 5 miles into Lake Mills, did the work. When I was done, I walked 5 miles back to the farm. Think about that. I earned a certificate so I could teach at the one-room schoolhouse at Fayetteville Grove. And I met Lorena, another teacher, and we were married. I took the pledge never to drink intoxicating liquors, and I never broke that pledge. We struck out on our own in 1903. We left Pa's farm at the homestead to homestead a ranch in South Dakota near Lorena's family. I rode out to South Dakota in a railroad cattle car with 21 cows to save money. Not exactly the nicest ride in the world. I earned money riding a horse 40 miles each way 2 times a week, delivering mail. Earning money was hard work. I built the log cabin. You'll see it here. It was 12 by 18, and there wasn't much room, so I bolted the bed to a pulley, and I could raise it up to the wall during the day so we had more room. But ranching went bust. We were flooded out after 2 years of hard work. Then we moved to Stevenson, Michigan, and I bought a farm and raised strawberries. And that worked pretty well. I started to work for the Grange. The Grange was a movement that was for the man, the wife, the daughters, the sons, and the grandparents. Hear that inclusive language that will be popular later? The Grange was a fraternal organization that fought the monopolistic railroads and grain elevators that ripped off us poor farmers with their exorbitant rates. Some said the Grange was a revolutionary group of troublemakers. It was a fraternal group who just wanted to earn enough money to make it. I'd go out in the barn and practice my Grange speech, giving it to the cows. Pa called after a while, asked me to come home to the farm. He needed my help. I sold the farm, returned to the home farm at Astelin. Of course, things didn't work out with Pa. We didn't see eye to eye. So then I moved to Lake Mills in 1918. I sold insurance, never made much money. My favorite phrase was, "You betcha." I was an optimistic person. I was an early riser. I was energetic. I was very active in the Congregational Church and in the statewide church. I became a Mason. I did auctioneering work. I advocated for education on the school board. I promoted the building of the new Lake Mills High School in 1939. I sold insurance for 65 years. And then I became a realtor. I served 30 years on the county board. Loved the work. I was chairman of the county board for 2 years. I served on more boards than you could count. I loved being with people. I had 3 kids who worked for their education, and I was a member of the Lake Mills Astelin Historical Society. Remember that? I loved politics and people. I loved standing up for principles. I was always ready to speak for what was right. I advocated for the women's right to vote. I attended African American church when I visited Marion in Texas. The things I've done over the years. Let me tell you one. One Sunday after church and dinner, I turned around, picked up the phone, and called the director of the county home. I told him there was this 90-year-old lady that I knew all my life who needed to be admitted to the county home right now. You know what he said. There's a waiting list. You know, it still is true today. I insisted. I was on the county board. This lady paid taxes all her life. She had no place to go. She couldn't stay at home. I was forceful and pointed with the guy. After a few days, I got a call. The lady was in the county home. I loved working with the people of Lake Mills. I loved working to make education strong. I served my church. I helped business thrive. I stuck to my values. My 3 kids graduated from the university. This farm boy is going to have a long 90 years of life. You betcha. Thank you. And come and look at the pictures if you'd like.
Sure good to see so many people here today. My name is James Hine, but people call me Jim. I grew up in Milford, the oldest of 14 children of Clara and Ben Hine. We lived in a small house across the road from the brick schoolhouse. The house was very small, so small in fact some of us slept in the basement. My mother's father, E.J. Steinel, owned the land on the south shore of Rock Lake, where the beach is. He rented out boats and had a water slide at a resort for people to enjoy. I believe it's now City Park Sandy Beach. Well, I didn't have much time spending fun. Being the oldest of such a big family, I had to make sure we had everything we needed. My dad wasn't around very much. He took to the bottle a lot and left my mom to tend to the house and kids. But my mom was a strong, determined lady, and boy, could she cook and bake. I sure do miss her seafoam candies at the holidays and her dumpling soup. She could make a meal out of nothing. She was a creative and resourceful woman. She had a funny quirk. When she was working or thinking at something with determination, she would stick her tongue out of her mouth in concentration. Many of us kids learn to be good cooks. My twin baby sisters, Jean and Jane, owned and operated their own supper club. Pinole? I don't think it's around anymore, but it was a swell place in its day. My family even printed its own recipe book in honor of my mother. I grew up doing farm work at the Foyt's Cheese Factory in Milford, at the intersection just east of our little house. I graduated from Lake Mills in 1937. With the world engaging into war, I enlisted in the Marines on January 3rd, 1942, and was sent to San Diego, California for basic training. I never came home until I was laid to rest here. I was sent overseas on January 1st, 1942. The last letter I sent to my family was dated November 12th, 1942, when I was traveling in the thick of the battle at Guadalcanal. I'd seen much action through the Solomons, or the private first class in my short time in the Marines. During the Battle of Tarwaca, I was wounded and died on November 20th, 1943. I was 23 years old. For 4 years, my remains were kept in a temporary crypt in Hawaii until my parents requested that I should be buried back at my place of birth. I was the first casualty from Lake Mills in World War II. It took 4 years until I was returned in 1947. My remains were on the first boat of war dead to arrive in Chicago. I was escorted by uniformed Marines to my final burial. Such an honor it was. My mother was very proud of my accomplishments. She had me buried here, right next to her. It was an honor to serve my country. In fact, I didn't only serve my country, but Kelly, Don, Marv, Phil, my brothers, also served. I was proud to serve and thankful that they made it home to live long lives, even if I didn't. The heartache my family felt for my death was life-changing for all them. If you're down hall by the Odd Fellows Hall, in the alley between the buildings, you will see a mural that a local artist painted about Lake Mills' military finest. I'm on there together with my brothers.